Okay. Let's go ahead and do roll call. So just maybe send a chat or say aye if you have audio abilities. Letitia Braxton with Blue Ocean.
Here.
Matt D'Amico.
Here.
Don Frazier. Shirley Gregory. Stephanie Jameson.
Here.
Jessica Lilly. Gloria Nelson.
Here.
Laura Quintana. I'm just looking at the attendees. There are a couple folks who didn't have speaking abilities yet. Nick Steglerwall, did I say that right?
You did, and I'm here.
Vicki Young. Councilman Todd Crandall.
Almost.
How do I say it?
No, you'll just have me here tonight.
Oh, gotcha. Doug Anderson.
Yep.
Lori Hay, present.
Here.
I'm here. Jesse Hillman. Emery Wang.
Here.
Rick Johnson.
I'm here.
Pete Kriskamis.
Here.
Marta Chitska. And Amy Mante. Wow, we have almost
Here.
everyone here. All right.
There's Amy.
Yeah, sorry, I spoke over you, Amy. Okay, so we'll just do a quick meeting agenda review. So I'm going to recap everything I've learned from the past two presentations, just so y'all know where I am in terms of being up to speed, and you can make sure I didn't miss anything major. We'll go through some design review panel examples, because I did hear that that was something folks were hoping to see. We'll go over the boundary expansion of the commercial revitalization district, which would also be the design review panel area. We'll review existing design guidelines that Dundalk has, which are our starting point. And we did that a little bit already, and we'll just kind of move from that baseline. We'll review some additional design considerations and think about what this design guideline format should look like. And then we'll talk next steps in the timeline and have a chance for a Q&A. Does that sound good to everyone? Anything missing? All right, so I took some notes on what I heard in terms of the advisory panel input. Amy Minzer described that the current approach to commercial design guidelines has been kind of with a carrot that if you want grant money, you would adhere to these quality standards. However, it's also important to be able to hold developers accountable to quality standards as well. I heard that safety remains a concern along these corridors, and so perhaps with some design guidelines specific to lighting and to pedestrian engagement, we can create an environment that feels safer for more people. We talked about Logan Village. I think it was described as a big wad of parking lot. And so thinking about how can we make, this area better and more inviting, maybe greener. We talked about whether or not the design review panel will help to encourage commercial interests or not. I would say it's not directly related to that. And we'll get into, as you can see, in the notes here, Joe did go over several existing programs that Dundalk is a part of that do incentivize commercial revitalization, such as the Sustainable Community Area, the Commercial Revitalization District, and the Main Street Program. These all provide grant funding and county and state support for commercial revitalization. What the design review panel does is provide that baseline aesthetic standard by which commercial revitalization would occur. I also heard that residents in Dundalk have strong opinions and ideas about how things should look, and that's really where this design review panel comes in and protects and upholds those preferences. And then, yes, folks wanted to see examples of how this works, and we'll go through that today. Lori provided a virtual tour of the area at our last meeting, and you guys began discussing different design priorities, murals and gateways, and we talked about expanding the commercial boundary to Logan Village and also several establishments along the traffic circle at Dundalk Avenue near Turner Station. Is there anything I'm missing in terms of progress so far as we move forward? Okay. So this is a design review panel example from Pikesville. You'll see in this title here that Pikesville is hyperlinked. So when I send out this presentation, you can click on their design guidelines that they have that informed this example. This master plan is from a commercial developer, and I have to thank Marta for providing these examples. This was a developer that was adding establishments to this area, and you can see here that all of the comments in red are ones that the design review panel made. So adding a crosswalk and making sure that it looks a certain way, adding more lighting and making sure it's LED lighting, or that it's a certain height and it's a certain type of lamp. Also the fencing, making sure that the fencing is consistent with what's already been there, or that it looks a certain way based on what the community of Pikesville has described wanting to see occur. And so as a result of this input, the developer did amend their design, and I think what would have been just a straight up Starbucks instead has additional landscaping, pleasing to the eyes, fencing, and a more engaging pedestrian environment. So this is one example of how the design review panel process can positively affect future development. Another example is in Catonsville. So this is an architect that, as part of their package that they presented to the design review panel, they looked for trends and patterns in how buildings were already established on the main corridor. And you'll see here that there's kind of a pattern of how this like angular entryway, which they incorporated into their building entryway as a result. This is the building to the left. You can see, obviously, it's very modern, but as you can see to the right there, they focused on materials and colors that were taken from the main corridor and incorporated into the texture of this building. So even though it is very modern, it was respectful of what was already existing around it and making sure that it was cohesive. And again, you can click on the Catonsville link at the top there to view their guidelines and how they informed the design review panel. Are there any questions about these two examples? Okay. So this is the boundary expansion that we discussed. I want to make sure it's incorporating everything that folks wanted to see. So this is the commercial revitalization district up above. And then we talked about adding the Logan Village Shopping Center, and further south you can see the Dundalk Avenue traffic circle, specifically including the doghouse and an auto center down there. Does this map appear to incorporate everything folks had? Oh, can you see the full map? I might have. It's off a little bit. Oops. Well, sorry, it got cut off a little bit at the bottom there, but the traffic circle is incorporated at the bottom. Does this map appear to encompass everything folks wanted to see as part of this boundary?
Yes, I agree with that.
Okay.
Does it make any sense to, can you go back to that slide, Jesse? Thanks. Does it make any sense to anyone to incorporate kind of the section of Dundalk Avenue between the existing commercial area and the proposed Logan Village, or is that all residential there?
Well, it's mainly residential, but then there's these like random industrial sites to the west of Dundalk Avenue. I mean, there is some streetscaping treatment along the road there, so I don't know whether there'd be, I mean, I suspect that industrial site is always going to be industrial, but you know, if there was some, I don't know what the right term you planner people would use, overlay or whatever, to describe where if, you know, ownership or use changed hands, but, you know, I was thinking about that too. Are there any design treatment type things that we want to continue? But I don't know.
I was going to ask that before you did as well. And the only reason I thought of it is that there is a large kind of warehouse industrial site. There's then also the area that is currently a American Legion Lodge. So there is, I don't know what the possibility of that, perhaps changing, renovations being made there and or changing hands, but it may be worth it to include that just in the event that something were to change there, or they want it to do something to make sure that it continues to stay within line of what we're looking for.
So that would be just on the west side of the street then?
Yeah, so the American Legion is west of Dundalk Avenue and south of Dunhill. It's the little gray lobby building in the middle of that lot. And then, yeah, so I wouldn't want people to be concerned that somehow there's some desire to take people's residential houses on Dundalk Avenue and redevelop them for something else. So that would be my concern about having like some random stripe of district connecting these different commercial sites, if you know what I mean. I just would be concerned that the public might perceive that the wrong way. But
yeah, I can think of at least two other people that would share that concern.
there are, I mean, I think in general, yes. I'm sorry, Nick.
I have a question only because they're not highlighted at the moment, but there are a couple of churches that are not included right next to the main street that are not highlighted in this area. You can't really see the street names on this map because of how kind of pulled out it is, but just kind of south of there are two churches that are not included. I don't know if we want to include them.
You mean south of the traffic circle or south of
the Main Street area?
Of the shopping center, yeah. So like the south
area.
South side of Dunman Way, you have well, the north and south side, you have St. Rita's buildings. You have the St. George's, St. George's and St. Matthew's. I can't remember. I was thinking about the churches too. The reason to possibly include them is that all the churches in our community are kind of dying. And so the question is what's going to become of those properties in the future, and the potential, if there's a way to
do they represent architecture that you want maintained, or kind of a touchstone that could inform the character of future development?
I think the St. Michael's and George's Church, or whatever it's called. Sorry, I apologize that I'm butchering the name of it, but it's right on the corner of Shipping Place and Dunman Way and Dundalk Avenue. It's on Dundalk Avenue, but anyway, it's a very beautifully landscaped sort of stucco building with brick accents, and it's certainly something where it's ideally that wouldn't be demoed. But I don't want to. I mean, the church obviously, if it comes to a point where they need to sell the building, it's kind of like, there may be some change that's needed. So I don't want to like ruin their ruin the reality of their financial situation entirely in terms of, but it is a beautiful building. St. Rita's, a lot of St. Rita's is getting redeveloped, but there's some buildings that are still held by St. Rita's. There's also the Enterprise apartments that are immediately south of the Logan Village Shopping Center.
Right.
And that was my other thought of whether, that's, recently constructed, so chances are there is going to be something different that's going to happen there right now, but
are you referring to the greens?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people in the community think of it as that there's a connection between Logan Village Shopping Center and the greens, but in terms of, but I don't know that there has to be.
But if you may not recall, but when the Greens presented to the community of Turner Station, they gave Logan Village management money so the facade would look alike. And the only place that got a little bit of that facade is the carryout store, Big Bite, something like that. And it never went throughout the other stores, but that was supposed to be an agreement so they could all, have that same look.
Oh, interesting.
Well, I think we can take a look at those areas, the churches, the section of Dundalk Avenue, excuse me, and the apartments, and kind of, just mull over what would be the advantages versus the disadvantages. Because it sounds like there could potentially be some negative effects, and we don't want to impose that on any of those. But if it looks like the positive could outweigh the negatives, then maybe we'll definitely consider them.
Yeah, and I'll just add with the residential concern, there is a clear divide in the design review panel of commercial design guidelines versus residential ones. So this would be, purely commercial that we're talking about today. So these are some site photos I took of Logan Village, just the creative juices flowing about how design guidelines could improve this facade.
So Jesse, how did you get all those seagulls to line up like that?
I know, it was very Alfred Hitchcock. They just kind of swarmed around me. But this is a giant parking lot. It's not very inviting for pedestrians. The interior, the awning, sidewalk area. What would it look like if there was some cafe seating. You can see that there's signage covering the windows, and I know that that's something that's discouraged in the existing Dundalk design guidelines, because you want to be able to see into the storefronts. So so just some images to, yeah.
Sorry, Jesse, do you know if anyone were able to connect with the current owner? That was something that, gosh, I'm having a senior moment.
Joe.
Joe, thank you. That was something that Joe was attempting to do.
Really, I didn't know that was on the docket. I know it's Thornhill, right? Thornhill Developers, or
I don't know. I thought it was a gas station owner, like Carol Fuels.
Yeah, Carl, yes. Carl Foods is the current owner, to my understanding. That's correct, Amy.
Oh, okay. So maybe Thornhill is just the realtor for him. I'm
sorry, can I interject? Is it Carol Fuel? Is that what you said? Like Carol Independent Fuel?
Do we know that? I don't know that we know that. I think Thornhill is the leasing agent.
Yeah.
We can find that out.
We'd like to
Yeah.
talk to the actual property owners, because I'd love to see this site redeveloped. I don't want to plan for how to make their little ridiculous shopping center look neo-traditional when it's kind of ridiculous. I'd rather see it redeveloped. I think there's potential for housing, possibly artist housing on the site. I think there's probably too much retail for the site, but yet I also know that people really, really want to see a grocery store. So if there was redevelopment that maybe included some housing, senior housing or artist housing or both, it could be that on the one hand, you're getting rid of some of the retail, replacing it with something else, and, possibly having less parking lot. But that's just me.
Yeah, the community definitely is hoping to get a grocery store back there. That is for sure. And do we want to have a senior housing complex to be so close to one another? That's just a thought. But
I understand. I don't know what the need is.
Yeah, it's obviously wasted space that need to be revived in some kind of a way.
Right. It is it's a lot of parking lots. We'll get into some different design ideas around that, but yeah, perhaps ultimately it's about infilling that with other uses. So just some more site visit photos of signage. So I hear Captain Harvey's has a great steak sandwich that I should check out. But you can see that there's some damage to their sign. The Logan Village sign complex has some missing signs. Doghouse has some great kind of vintage antique signage, but it's looking a little worse for wear. So these are all areas where some guidelines could, set standards for front facades that might improve the area. So the existing Dundalk design guidelines really focuses solely on storefronts with all of these categories as a part of that. And so in addition to storefront facade looks, what are some other categories that we might think about adding to a broader design guideline to really reflect the character, the identity of Dundalk, make it more engaging for pedestrians, make it greener. So this is kind of what we'll be chatting about tonight. So with Streetscape, sidewalks and crosswalks obviously make an area feel safer, make people feel like they should get out of their car and shop and walk around. There was a concern expressed about certain areas within the commercial revitalization district feeling unsafe. So perhaps lighting, improved lighting could help. Street furniture like benches, cafe seating where it's appropriate. Green infrastructure, so this bottom image, my background is in green infrastructure, so you'll see quite some of that influence. I come from Blue Water Baltimore, which is an environmental nonprofit. So this is a stormwater bump out that absorbs runoff from the street, but it also provides some like native plants that improve the aesthetics of the area, and it serves as a traffic calming measure because it kind of makes the street skinnier, so it tends to slow folks down. It's good for increasing pedestrian access and bike racks. So what are some other categories or ideas that come to mind when seeing this topic of streetscape come up?
Jesse, this is Stephanie Jameson. The shopping center is surrounded by gorgeous parks, but there is some, easy fixes that can be done, like raising up the treescape so that there's less overgrown trees and a better visual from the road to the shopping center. We've talked about a lot of this in the past, but there's always been a, well, who's responsible for it? So I think that would be valuable to look at that area in front of the shopping center and see what can be done to make it more beautiful and safer and allow for some more visibility from Dundalk Avenue.
Yeah, thank you for raising that, Stephanie. Whenever we've brought that up in the past with the county, the response has been that all the trees have to stay for environmental reasons, which I think is kind of a bit narrow-minded in the sense that there are a lot of trees in the park there, and they do completely block any view of the stores.
Well, and even if we don't take, I'm sorry, Amy, but even if we don't take the trees out, there's no reason why we can't cut them higher so that, I mean, they're very developed trees. So you could raise that sight line just simply by, trimming those trees up, and I think it would make a difference.
Mm-hmm. I think setbacks, I mean, particularly if we're talking about Logan Village and other places, so possibly talking about, is there some desire to move the buildings closer to the street or not? Or is it that we're trying to have it be a more viable shopping center with massive parking lot in front of it, which would obviously be the other way to go. I don't know what's really viable there, to be honest, because it looks really, really bad right now. So.
And we'll talk about parking lots specifically in the next slide.
And just because you have some imaging of it, I know that there's been some work on bike lanes along the Merritt Boulevard corridor in Dundalk. It would be nice to see maybe if there's some way to, work in some of that more, green living of biking instead of driving, walking instead of driving, in and around this area would be lovely.
Yeah, it seemed like the avenue right in front of Logan Village really feels more like a highway, even though it's not very high traffic, or at least it wasn't when I was driving there. It didn't feel very like a place where you would walk around much. So I did see folks waiting for the bus and utilizing the sidewalk. So that could be a spot where a bike lane, a protected bike lane, might be beneficial.
And what about a crosswalk? Then that would be for street calming purposes. There are 2 bus stops there. And what happened when the bus dropped them off at one side, adjacent to the the shopping center, and then people have to walk across the street, and it is high traffic area, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And as well as high speed. Most people do not abide by the speed limit there. So it gets to be a little dangerous or challenging for people to walk back and forth on either side. So both of the bus stops are adjacent to one another.
I did see that. Okay, definitely make note of that.
Yeah, I don't know why why Dundalk Avenue had to remain so wide when you get south of Belclair Road, because there's no streetcar there anymore, and there's no bridge going to the steel mill anymore. So it's not conveying thousands of people to work every day when you get to that part of Dundalk Avenue. So I don't know what the logic was, but I mean, to Belclair, you have trucks that are still getting on the ramp to at Dunhill. A lot of them, there are trucks that are turning to get to Groening, and sometimes you have large vehicles that are getting on the ramp that goes to 695 around Belclair. So that area, I think, is in part wide to accommodate that. And whenever we've tried to talk about narrowing the road up near the shopping center, it's always, oh, it's an evacuation route. So, you know, I don't know.
Okay, that's great to know.
So we'd love to have bump outs and things that would make it safer for pedestrians to cross Dundalk Avenue, but there have been challenges with that because of the evacuation route thing.
Okay.
So, but I don't know. So maybe something's changed regarding that.
So that means that there was pushback even from a bike lane along there, Amy?
Well, the bike lanes are sort of there. They were part of the streetscape. They're just, I don't know that they're marked everywhere, and they're not protected bike lanes. You know, they're kind of like a parking lane / bike lane / turn lane that people randomly use. So it's at the moment they're nebulous, but I think that was the original intent, was that those would also be bike lanes.
Right. So maybe there could be some enhancements to make it feel more like a complete street, with all the different mobility modalities. Okay, so this big honkin' parking lot. Yes, perhaps it will be completely redone, but I was trying to think within, Lori provided the great example of Merritt Park. So the Merritt Park Shopping Center does improve upon their parking lot with pedestrian access and trees. And then you can see in this visual, they also have, future visions of it being a place where folks can sit outside and engage, and just better utilizing that space, not making it quite so auto-centric. So here are some design guideline ideas for, enhanced pedestrian accommodations with sidewalks and crosswalks, trees and landscaping. Maybe take it even a step further with green infrastructure. So you're treating some of that stormwater runoff from the asphalt with bioretentions that also look good. And then, I just started thinking, I was like, what do you do with a giant parking lot that's underutilized? Maybe you could have festivals there. I know there's already a farmer's market, but like a food truck festival or something. So maybe including in these guidelines that you want big parking lots like this made accessible for community events. That could be part of it. So any other ideas around parking lot revitalization?
I can kind of chime in really quickly on that. I managed a center up here in Harford County where Wegmans is for a number of years. And that's a very large parking lot. And they did exactly what your previous slide, there were islands They actually had music, speakers were piped into those islands, which was also very nice. You know, when people get out of their cars, you know, they hear, you know, nice music. And we also started doing a monthly music festival, which brought a lot of people to the area. All of the merchants would participate. It was a chance for them to get exposure. We would get like balloon artists, and I think at one time we had a bouncy house and, you know, things for kids to get involved. And it was just a really good, it took a lot of work and it requires a lot of coordination, but I think everybody really enjoyed it. So when you have a more inviting large area like that, you know, people are just more willing to come and participate.
Any other comments about parking lots? And again, landscaping. This can be a great way to show some consistency, you know, between these different areas in the commercial district. Using the same kind of landscaping, I would certainly emphasize the value of native landscaping, native perennials and shrubs, because they require less maintenance long-term. They really show the character of our natural landscape, and they provide all sorts of alternative benefits to, you know, pollinators and the other critters around us. Decorative quality, just, you know, showing kind of these hanging baskets. That could be something that's required for development. And then street trees. They, you know, yes, they can sometimes interfere with storefront facades, but they also certainly make an area more inviting for pedestrians with the shade and the cooling effect that they have. Any other ideas with regards to landscaping? Okay, and then just some other features about area identity. So last meeting we talked about murals. So maybe emphasizing that if there is, you know, that murals are strongly encouraged if there's, you know, room for them on buildings. Thinking about banners, ways to, you know, kind of show that like you are in the commercial district. Thinking about, you know, the waterfront identity of the Dundalk, greater Dundalk area and how to represent that. And I just showed a picture of this roundabout, the traffic circle, because it does seem like an opportunity for some kind of gateway signifier, you know, sculptural element or something to kind of show that, you know, you're in Dundalk. Or you're right near Turner Station. So any other ideas with regards to identities or gateway history, how to represent that aesthetically?
I just have a question. So is there, do we know if there will be any, for gateway signage and things? It's right now we're having trouble with finding space to put things like that. It would either have to be on like private property, because a lot of the median strips along Dundalk Avenue, we've had issues getting approval to put gateway signage in those median strips on county land or things like that. So at this point, it's trying to find spaces with, you know, on private land that someone would allow us to put a gateway sign.
Well, yeah, that could certainly be within these guidelines, and the design review panel would help to enforce that if if there's commercial development on that private property, say, well, this is something we want to see incorporated, is this gateway signage based on what Dundalk has told us.
Yeah, I mean, there have been repeated issues of trucks just driving right over the roundabout circle.
Really?
So, I mean, I hate to be, Debbie Downer, but I think you'd sort of have to think about that if you spent $20,000 on some piece of art and plopped it in the middle, and how likely would it be to survive for a year? I don't know. I mean, signs, gateway signage to Turner Station's been redone how many times now, Gloria? 3, 4, and that's not in the middle of the street.
Yeah, yeah. And the circle has been destroyed, refurbished with greenery, and initially we had an object that Trade Point had given us, and it was in the middle, and it represented a history of Beth Steel, and they gave it to us, and it was so really nicely in the center, and it got destroyed. It really got destroyed. So yes, I would be very concerned about spending a lot of money to put something in the center when it's constantly, if it isn't the bus, it's the accident, car going too fast coming up Dundalk Avenue and not being able to yield enough to get to the roundabout. So yes, that would be an issue.
Gotcha. That's really helpful context. So maybe some other things need to happen first before considering that as a gateway.
Yes.
Sorry, any other ideas around area identity, Letitia?
I was just thinking, I mean, it may not be all that aesthetically pleasing, but initially my thought is, could you put like protective bollards around the inner portion of that circle to make sure that whatever you put there is protected?
It's a good idea. Yeah, you could make it both structurally, protective, and also decorative.
We could take a look at some of the other traffic circles in the county that are functioning better in terms of not being destroyed by motorists, and maybe see how they're set up.
Totally. And then, another category for design would be new construction, obviously. So, maybe Logan Village gets completely redone. So what are standards in terms of the kinds of materials you want to see? Are there certain architectural details or historic architectural styles? Amy, you mentioned setbacks. And then, what kind of scale do you want to see? Are you okay with something that's huge, or do you want, smaller establishments, or something, based on where the development's occurring? Does this bring up anything for folks? Any specific desires?
Well, I will say that I think that like the greens at Logan Field, while it's a larger scale multifamily housing complex, I think that they made a real effort to try to have it fit within the context of some of the styles, Tudor-ish styling that you see on Dundalk Avenue, and brick and things like that people are used to seeing. And then I can't remember, but I think they used some different materials on different levels of the building to try and help kind of scale it down a little bit in terms of how huge it felt. I've actually always felt like that Catonsville building you showed, while I get that colors reflect, it always seems like it was sort of dropped from outer space to me. Maybe so I do appreciate that it's picking up on colors and materials. But so to my mind, because it's Dundalk Avenue, the buildings could be taller than 2 stories in theory if there was a redevelopment. So long as there was thought to how do the buildings relate to adjacent buildings, how do they relate to the materials that are in the community. And because I think of Dundalk Avenue as, while it's maybe no longer a super heavy traffic street, it's a major street. And so to my mind, density on Dundalk Avenue can be higher than the streets behind it.
Sure.
But that's me. Other people may really hate that idea. So,
Are there strong opinions about density? Or other ideas around new construction standards?
Hey, Jesse, Amy, this is Matt D'Amico. I think that what Amy, what you're getting at, what you mentioned earlier, is probably something you need to consider. Some of these properties, like the Logan Center that you're talking about, others, they're large properties, and if the owner is going to reinvest in those properties, they're going to need to do it in a way that adds revenue. They're not just going to come in and do facade improvements and a bunch of landscaping if they're not going to be able to raise the rent or figure out another way to make more money. And these guidelines need to, I think, consider that maybe long term from now, it could be 10 or 15 or 20 years, you never know. But at some point, those properties could be completely redeveloped. You probably do need to ask yourselves, if that were to happen, what do you want those property owners to do? They're going to be reinvesting, redeveloping, potentially infill development or demolition or partial demolition or entire demolition, who knows? But I think the guidelines should probably address that. I don't know the answer to that, but I think you need to think about heights and massing, and maybe some of these properties are large enough that taller buildings make sense in certain locations on the property, and maybe closer to the residential, they should be lower, but closer to Dundalk Avenue, maybe the buildings could be taller. I'm just talking out loud here. And then some of them are large enough that they could be, you could begin to introduce, new streets or pedestrian connections or mews, or it's not just another gigantic shopping center. It might be a series of buildings that have a completely different scale to them. It could be residential, it could be commercial, it could be a number of different things. So that begins to think about things like the placement of buildings and the potential block and street patterns, or new connections through the street, through these properties, whether they're streets or mews or sidewalks or trails or connections, and even introducing open space that might be permanent open space that could be part of a redevelopment that could also serve as an event space, for the things that, Jesse and you and others were talking about. So I think there's, something to be thought of regarding the sort of physical planning, the urbanism of this, if you will, the scale of buildings, potential new streets or blocks, open space, all of that. I'm not sure what category that falls in, but I think it's something that you might want to give some thought to.
Those are some great points.
yeah, well, so related to that, the county currently pays for the only landscaping that's really occurring in the main street. So if you want to add a bunch to private property owners when they're not really, there's not a whole, I think we just need to be realistic about what's possible, because like hanging baskets and watering them twice a week is a very, very expensive endeavor that might work in Timonium, where there are people buying clothing at Eileen Fisher, but is not really the reality of life here as we know it. So
Sure. No, that's a great point. Yeah, any landscaping does require a big maintenance plan to go with it.
And I like the hanging baskets. Some of my best friends are hanging baskets, but nonetheless.
All right, were there any other categories, just like broad design categories beyond what we've discussed that you feel could be addressed or that are missing from the conversation so far? And Matt, I think your comment about just density and making sure that these are flexible for what the future could hold is really helpful.
So I know you said this was just for commercial, but I think, so this may not apply, but I think allowing for mixed use buildings in new construction, I think would be worthwhile. I don't know if that's something that these guidelines touch on, but I just wanted to mention it so that we wouldn't do anything that would exclude that.
Yeah, I don't see why it would be prohibited, but Lori may know more about whether that's something that could be incorporated.
Yeah, I think we should think about that as we think about these long-term redevelopments, the big projects, you know, that may incorporate some different uses in the future.
All right. Well, so this next slide is really just about, you know, what's the format you want the guidelines to look like. So there is some examples in the existing Dundalk guidelines of, you know, yes, this, no, this. This example here you're seeing is from the Parkville commercial revitalization guidelines, and they use the words required and prohibited, which seems kind of angry to me. I would say maybe encouraged, discouraged, but I love that it provides this binary that's very clear of like, this is what we want, this is what we don't want, and that makes it easier to enforce and to interpret. So are there any other ideas around, you know, what this guideline layout should look like, and what do you think of kind of the binary approach?
This is really about making it, you know, clear and easy to potential developers who are going to be looking at these things for their designs.
Exactly.
Jess, this is Vicki from the Dundalk Chamber. If although I understand your whole thing about wording and making it nice and not, how do you enforce encouraged and not encouraged? I mean, I guess that's my only, you know, when you start, because I think it is a very difficult challenge of how is having too many regulations that you discourage people from moving into the area because it's too expensive and it's too cumbersome, and you're asking people, because we know the area is underdeveloped and has some issues, you want people to take a chance on the area and move in, but also I understand that we want some parameters that, you know, it doesn't look like a flea market when it's all over with because one person does X, Y, and Z and the other one does A, B, and C. But I would think you'd have to have something that's a little bit more than encouraged and discouraged. Otherwise, I don't know how you go about enforcement.
Sure. And maybe Marta or Matt can speak to what the design review panel process does in terms of, you know, kind of enforcing the standards of communities.
Yeah, sure. So I've been on both sides of this as a member of the design review panel, but also working, you know, for a developer who's designing projects in conformance with guidelines. And it's a balance. There are going to be some things where you might want to have certain requirements. You want parking lots to have street trees. You want to have light poles. And there's things like that that are fairly easy to say they're required. I also think it's important to have somewhere just a series of principles or objectives, because sometimes just because you require something, if you could require something, and the developer or someone could come along and literally meet exact requirements, but it still may not be that good. It just may, it may be the wrong color or the wrong size. Well, the awning goes side to side, so therefore you have to improve it. Well, if it's not a very attractive looking awning, you're kind of stuck with it. So if you have a set of principles or objectives with some words and some narrative that aren't so precise, but give a sense of the sort of design, the characteristics, the look, whether it's tied to history, that kind of thing, at least it gives the design review panel something to base their decision on. They can say, well, the objectives here were to be consistent with the historic character of Dundalk and to be compatible in terms of heights, etc., whatever. At least that's something that you can provide, base your comments on. I think and even though that sounds a little vague and objective or whatever, but it kind of is, and that's okay. As you remember, the design review panel members, they're experts. They're experts in the field of architecture, landscape architecture. So they're very good at what they do. They can read the guidelines and read the objectives and principles and make very good, solid suggestions for a developer that makes sense. I also think it's helpful to include imagery, a lot like what Jesse had, because that also gives a sense of what you're looking for. So my answer would be a balance of all of that. And some things require, some things encourage, some things discourage, set of principles and objectives and imagery. But when you put that whole package together, it starts to describe a kind of a spirit of the place, a character you're looking for. Without, you want to be overly onerous because then the developers are going to complain. But you don't want to be so vague that you don't get what you want either. So that's how I would approach this. Does that help?
Yes,
Yeah.
very helpful.
Yes, and this is Martha. I agree with Matt. Matt said it wonderfully. So we need basis on which design will be based to kind of provide feedback and to incorporate any feedback from design review panel perspective. And all of these reviews are very helpful because they based on the backgrounds of each design review panel, which comes from different backgrounds, engineer perspective, architecture perspective, or landscape architecture perspective. So this is just my.
So any other ideas on language? Sounds like we need maybe a mix of this, something that's got some teeth to it, or sounds like it does, and then some more flexible language as well.
I agree.
Okay. Moving right along, I want to stick to the time as much as possible. Your time is precious. So this has been the winter of feedback. And so the next step is going to be developing a draft plan, draft design guidelines, and sharing those with you all for review and edits. And we'll just have that iterative process until it is then introduced to the planning board and then also the county council for ultimate adoption. And with that, this is my contact information, and I'd like to open the floor to any remaining questions you all may have.
Do folks think it would be important, and do you think we'd have people participate if after the group approves the guidelines that we have a community-wide public meeting?
I feel like that would be a good idea, even if nobody comes. I feel like I just particularly with COVID, sometimes it's like people can feel completely just disconnected from things, and so I don't know how other areas that have developed these design guidelines have done it, but I feel like that would be a good thing to do, to offer that opportunity, and the possibility of making tweaks to this if needed, so to speak.
I also agree with that, Amy. I think we should give the opportunity to the communities at large.
I would absolutely agree with that.
Great. Excellent. We'll plan for that. Any other final questions or comments before we move on with our evenings?
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This has been really, really helpful for me as I get to know Dundalk and your priorities. I appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch. I'll share out this presentation and a summary later this week.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jesse.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jess.
everyone.
Thanks, Jesse.
You did
Thank
a
you,
fantastic
Jessie.
job, Jesse.
Thanks, Lori.
See you guys at the office. Bye bye.
See ya.